Death is not a subject that is often looked at too closely in video games. Sure, you can die in games, but you just reload or respawn and try things again. Death is a mechanic in games, not necessarily the topic that it looks at. It's not the same as looking at mortality, grief, and the impact of loss. The games that do look at these subjects tend to be smaller indie games like the game that I'm looking at today, Grimm's Hollow. Grimm's Hollow is a turn-based RPG developed by Ghost Hunter. It was released for PC in 2019. I got it personally via Steam, but you can find it on sites like itch.io and GameJolt as well. It is a free-to-play game, but at least in Steam, there is a little add-on that you can purchase to support the game and get some extras as well if you'd like and are wanting to kind of support the developers. As for rating, this doesn't have an official rating, being a very indie-style game. In terms of content, it's not really too bad, but it does deal with themes like death, and it kind of makes it hard to give an age rating. I'd say that it's probably E10 plus, maybe a little higher than that or a little on the high end of that, but definitely no higher than T. But that's just kind of my rough estimate for the game. In Grimm's Hollow, you play as Lavender. You wake up in this strange world and are told that you have died and are now the newest Reaper at Grimm's Hollow. In this universe, death doesn't automatically take you to the afterlife. Instead, people with too little or too much spiritual energy go to Grimm's Hollow, which is like this kind of in-between limbo place. Everyone at Grimm's Hollow is either a Reaper, like Lavender, or a ghost. Reapers do not have enough spiritual energy to make it to the afterlife and must reap ghosts to gain strength and be able to pass on. Ghosts, on the other hand, have too much spiritual energy, which also makes them unable to pass on to the afterlife. When ghosts are reaped, they lose that extra energy and they're able to pass on, and then Reapers gain some spiritual energy from the ghosts, and it just makes for this kind of nice little system. Admittedly, since the story here is rather short, you don't really learn more about the world of Grimm's Hollow. What causes people to have too much or too little spiritual energy? What is the afterlife like? Why are there Reapers? And how did those start? And, why do people turn into ghosts? Like, all these questions aren't really explored. Instead, the story focuses on a much more personal tale. When Lavender died, she wasn't alone. Her brother Timmy was with her, and so she wonders if he has also died and is in this strange place as well. This quest to look for her brother leads her all over Grimm's Hollow, and since I don't want to give away too much of the story, I'm not really going to go into too many more of the details here. Now, this isn't a long game. I finished it in a little over 2 hours. So the story doesn't delve too deep. However, it does take a rather direct look at death and the results of loss and dealing with one's mortality. The biggest parts that really focus on this are the endings, as the game has 4 different endings that are only dependent on 2 flags in the game: winning or losing against the final boss, and whether you are fully leveled or not at the end of the game. I found this story surprisingly engaging for as short of a game as this was. I think taking the path of a very intimate story really helped to pack a lot of emotional impact in a short amount of time. I'm sure that this style of narrative and story won't be everyone's preference, but I found it well done and moving. I don't know that it says anything new or unique about the subjects it tackles, but I think it handles the themes well. Gameplay in Grimm's Hollow is divided between 2 main parts: exploration and battle. Given that the game is pretty short, it shouldn't come as a surprise that neither of these systems are too complex. Exploration is pretty straightforward, especially if you've played a retro-style RPG before. You can control Lavender as she moves around the various locations in Grimm's Hollow. You start out at the town or main base of the Reapers, where you're able to talk to other Reapers, and even buy healing items at the bakery using spiritual energy, which functions both as a currency and an upgrading material in the game. You will be spending most of the game in the 3 caves found in Grimm's Hollow. These caves are where you will find ghosts that need reap. There are no random encounters in Grimm's Hollow. All enemies are able to be seen while exploring. If you run into a ghost on the exploration screen, it'll take you to a battle, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. While exploring caves, there are also a couple of other things you can find. You can find fellow Reapers, some of which who have been knocked out and need a bit of help. When you find them, they'll usually give you something in return, like some healing items, maybe a little bit of spiritual energy, or things like that. There are also some stray bits of spiritual energy to find as well. Both of these things tend to be found by finding secrets in the game. These aren't really that hard to find, but it did mix things up a little bit, give you something else to look for. Now, circling back to combat, if you've played a turn-based RPG before, you'll be familiar with a lot of what you'll find in Grimm's Hollow. You have a basic attack, which is labeled Swing. There is a selection for abilities or spells called Special. You access your items using Pocket, and Flee allows you to run away from combat. While these are fairly standard aspects of an RPG, Grimm's Hollow does do some interesting things with its combat. The one that stands out the most is that doing your basic attack, Swing, requires some timing in order to get the best attacks. When you swing your scythe, a bar will appear on the screen, and you're trying to press down when the scythe is in the center of the bar. How close you get to the center will determine the effectiveness of your attack. Another interesting aspect is that you gain special power by using your basic attack. These special power points are used to perform your special abilities. Another interesting aspect of the combat is that certain enemy attacks will trigger a dodge bar that is similar to the one used when attacking. To dodge the attack, you have to press down in the middle of the bar on a boot icon. When you defeat ghosts, you gain spiritual energy, which allows you to buy items or upgrade Lavender. You can increase Lavender's health, damage, defense, speed, and special power, as well as unlocking new abilities that she can use. When I started playing, I thought that the grid layout required you to buy upgrades in a certain order, but this isn't the case. You can purchase your upgrades in any order that you want. The grid is not really functional, it's just kind of more of a design choice. Overall, I thought the gameplay of Grimm's Hollow was enjoyable, but it does have its shortcomings. My biggest complaint was probably the evade bar. Grimm's Hollow isn't a strict turn-based game, but is more one that enemies will attack after so much time has passed. This means that enemies can attack while you're in your menus preparing to attack or use an ability. When the evade bar would come up during these times, it would be kind of hard to notice and sometimes didn't seem to work the best in these circumstances. I would also say that the combat in general just lacks a certain amount of depth. I didn't really find a use for the majority of these special abilities. Many of the stat reducing or buffing abilities would miss, making them really useless, and I'd never really experienced a game where you could miss trying to buff yourself. I was able to make it through pretty much the entire game by using the Pierce and Slash abilities, which makes a good amount of the upgrades kind of pointless in my opinion, and there wasn't really a need to deviate from using those two attacks. Now, as you've been watching, you've probably noticed one of the major aspects of the game's art style. It is very purple. I'm really not sure what I think about it. It's a very unique decision and really causes you to notice, especially when other colors are present, they really pop, but it's still a lot of purple. I think overall it does work, but I can understand why people wouldn't like this decision. Otherwise, the art is pretty nice looking in my opinion. Sprites are pretty unique looking, and really hits the weird tone that this game has. That tone is wholesome, but dealing with death and ghosts, and the art pretty much hits this perfectly. It can be simultaneously unsettling and cute all at the same time. In terms of sound, Grimm's Hollow has a very unique soundscape. I found the music to be quite fitting for the game, again reflecting both the kind of strange melancholy of the game, but also its wholesomeness at the same time. If I had to complain about the sound in the game, it would be that the noises for navigating the menus, because they seemed rather loud and just weren't very pleasant sounding. That's probably my biggest complaint when it comes to sound. So overall, it was pretty good, but there were maybe some minor things. In terms of performance, I had no issues with Grimm's Hollow, no crashes or bugs that I can remember. It was a completely smooth experience, which is always nice to have. Grimm's Hollow was an experience that I really enjoyed. The narrative gripped me, and the gameplay was straightforward and fun enough that I wound up playing it all in one sitting. That's maybe not that impressive since it is only around a couple hours in length, but my point is that I felt invested in the narrative and I wanted to keep playing until the end. It is also free to play, so even though it is short, there's no real barrier to giving it a try. That said, Grimm's Hollow isn't perfect. It's a bit lacking in depth in its combat, even for a game that is only a couple hours long. There are some awkward mechanics, and there were many abilities that just didn't really do a whole lot. I also imagine that the purple palette of the game is an aspect that will elicit a variety of reactions depending on the person. Personally, I would rate Grimm's Hollow a 9 out of 10. Its combat is probably the biggest thing holding this game back. But even so, I enjoyed my time with it, provided an emotional story that got me invested, and manages to create a world that is cute and wholesome while also being minorly unsettling at the same time. Package that all up in a free-to-play game, and I say you can't really go wrong. Even if you don't like it, you're not losing too much.